over there. Oh, thank you, Ms. Riley, for the introduction. Kelly Mercer was there. We've had the fiscal aid for a couple years now. The fiscal aid is a fancy word saying we help you guys understand what you can borrow. And so school districts, when they need to fund projects, and no different than other 171 school districts, they typically issue debt. The projects you all contemplate are usually a lot heftier than the cash balances you have available. So we do what's called bonding capacity, which is a fancy word for borrowing capacity. And the Kentucky law regulates how we calculate bonding capacity. So I have a very detailed presentation. And I talked to the other new board member. I'm happy to sit down and get into the minutiae and dive down how that's calculated and what changes that. But I thought for tonight it'd be important just to look at one slide that gives update on one capacity 1-2 scenarios that we've looked at regularly over the last couple of years. So the first one is the no general fund commitment and 80% of capital outlay. And that totals your bonding capacity of $42.6 million. The middle column, the School Facilities Construction Commission, they provide school districts with help and funding needs based on need throughout the state. And so you have some bonding capacity or some offers of assistance that can be used for the project, or priority 1 and 2 on your facility plan. So when we typically go into school districts, we talk about bonding capacity. That top scenario, no general fund commitment, 8% capital outlay, usually discussed. If they have the SFCC offers and what their local bonding capacity is. So right now, based on the current interest rate, it's about $42.6 million. Interest rates right now are still very low. I'll give a shout out to Mr. Martell. I was hoping to meet him in person today. I haven't seen him. We've been talking on the phone regularly for quite a while, and he and I worked on the LPC meeting, and I just want to say he was so responsive and helpful. And kind of in the last minute, I get a day change because interest rates move very fast. So I reached out to Mr. Martello and said, hey, can I put a new slide into my book? And he was so gracious to get it out. But I've enjoyed working with him. And because just the day before I was going to present, I've been given a presentation for the LPC about a week ahead, and interest rates went up. So your bonding capacity changed. And I'm going to be fully transparent on what happened. And so Mr. Martello distributed the book and very responsive. It's not here, right? Okay. Sorry, I haven't met him in person. That's why
You may come, but
okay. So he's really, I wanted it's going to be a big follow here. So that's he's just helpful through the process of LPC because the day we were going to present, the rates changed. So, and I've kind of a theory on interest rates changing. So we've seen a little bit of recovery in the economy about the second week of February, and I likely correlate that with the vaccine being more widely distributed and people seeing the light at the end of the pandemic. So 10 years ago, if this would have happened, we would have froze. My markets, when I talk about us, our markets would have froze. We didn't know how to pick up our workstation and go work at home. But now we've been, and my markets have been successfully able to do that. And the world, other sectors have as well. So we're seeing some recovery and kind of a light at the end of the tunnel. I anticipate rates staying low for probably the remainder of this year. But as the economy continues to take turn pages, there's recovery funds coming out, there is that expectation that interest rates could change and move, and likely have upward pressure. So right now, if you look to borrow, I'd estimate that borrowing rate for a 20-year bond, that's how low. So when we do mortgage rates, we typically issue 15 or 30-year mortgages, but Kentucky requires school district to issue debt at 20 years, fixed rate, and we anticipate that rate to be about 2.25%. So that's what these scenarios are based off of. The second scenario is committing a level of general fund. And the scenario I was asked to do $350,000 for 20 years. That is a 20-year commitment. The anticipation is hopefully that funding at the state changes and would not have to put in that money. But it is something to note that if funding goes down from the state and it's above any level of bonding capacity, that money for debt service payments has to come from somewhere. So that's just for context, so that's the scenario there. The SFCC bond is the same amount because the same amount of offers you have available. But the district capacity goes from 40.3 million with no general fund commitment to 40.78 for a total bonding capacity of a little over 50 million based on the current situation. So these numbers, as your partner, we're happy to update them as regularly as you need. And we're excited to be a part of the project and happy to answer any questions on bonding capacity or what's calculated, including these numbers.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the 2.25% interest rate compares even in the last 5 years?
Well, actually, I wish my colleague Chip was here because he says that he's been lying to people his whole career, because we've seen quite a bit declining interest rates. But 2.25, we hit our all-time low probably December and January of this year. Rates, if you were selling bonds, I'll use Bullitt County, for example, they locked in a rate of about 1.8% for a 20-year fixed rate. I think Davis County sold last summer and they sold at like 2.12% or like 1.93. So it's been hovering it was low in the summer and got even a little lower in the fall, but still very low compared to historical rates. So if you were borrowing 5 years ago, I would have been happy for you to lock in 3%. I would have been like, win. I mean, and it's still very, when you think about 3%, it's still a pretty low rate, but it has gone a little bit lower. It has picked up recently.
Any other questions?
I'm passionate about bonding. I'm happy to sing.
I want to go up on your offer though.
Yes, I want to do it. I love it. I love talking about it. Yes, and I only brought one of my LPC books, but I will happily give some of the stuff high-level bonding capacity. I'll get you a couple of this. That'll be helpful to digest when we can meet when you're available.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And now I think Ms. Lemire from Ross Tarrant Architects will take over.
Hello, it's great to be here today and talk to you all. We are going to give really just an overview of where the project is today so everyone can get familiar with it. And I was wondering how many of you all have seen these plans before? Is it a mix of like some people are seeing them for the first time stuff? Okay. That's going to help us kind of pace how we go through them, because if all of you had seen them several times, then we might go a little bit faster, but I think it's really important for you to understand how the plans are working. So a little bit about me. I've been with Ross Tarrant Architects for 20 years. I'm a principal and studio head there, and I'm part of this project. That's kind of recent because another one of our studio heads left, who was in charge of this project. So I'm really going to depend on my team who has been working on this project since day one to really talk the plans with you all. And I will ask them to come up here now and introduce themselves. And then I'm going to actually be running the slideshow while they talk to the plans. But I really want this to be a conversation about what these plans are and what you're seeing on the screen. So if you have any questions about what you are seeing, please interrupt. We can answer them and try to make sure you really understand what the plans are for the festival. So thank you guys, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
I'm Michael Hughes, project manager on the project.
I'm Brian Buckner, I'm project architect on the project.
My name. Sorry, we also have our consulting engineer here. So Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I'm a CMTA consulting engineer, been working in the district for a long time. Really pleased to be here, part of your project. So.
And then,
We have a whole presentation that we're going through, and halfway through it, Trace Creek, that's all kind of in the back, they are going to come up here too and add talk a little bit. So they'll introduce themselves with their slide.
yeah, and Trace Creek is Trace Creek Construction is the construction manager on this project. So just jumping right in here. So we'll start here with a couple of renderings of the project as it now stands. Just to give you kind of an update on where we are in the process, the drawings are about approximately halfway through the construction documents phase, and that's kind of the final phase. Schematic design is the first, where the rough overalls are established, design development starts to get a little more detailed. And then you go into construction documents, and that's actually the bidding documents that you're putting together to bid and build the project. And we're about halfway through that process. And we've kind of come to a point where we do need some additional feedback from this committee and others in order to finish out that remaining half of the construction document. So that's in part why we're trying to establish some of the things that we'll be talking about tonight, so that we can actually move forward in completing those construction documents. But so just to talk about this rendering here a little bit. So this is the approach from kind of to the right of the wall construction, which is pretty typical for schools, which means that it's a concrete block structural wall, spray foam insulation, very energy efficient, and then the brick or stone veneer. And so just other building systems, it does have a lightweight insulated concrete roof with a R30R value. The one thing with this throughout is that it is designed to be very energy efficient by its form to begin with. And that can talk about more in terms of systems, but just the actual design and form of the building is informed by daylighting, energy efficiency, things of that nature. So trying to keep it kind of high level here. So aluminum storefront windows. So those are kind of the major building systems. And the other thing that you'll see here is the approach from the visitor loop coming up the main entry here, punctuated by a canopy and a bell tower there to kind of be that beacon that kind of leads you to the main entrance from anywhere from the visitor entry.
Can you pause for a second?
Absolutely.
Can you walk me through school safety? Are we allowed to have the access, do you know what I mean, with our front windows to be visible like that, where we have to have those coatings? In terms of the ability to see in the way that we have in our front, do you know what I mean, that new school safety that would be good? So if this was required the way we have now, wouldn't that have to be covered so that it can't be see-through in, and that would mess with the aesthetics of the front, the way that that's designed?
Are you talking about these windows?
Primarily those, but my understanding is like you're not to be able to see into, to be able to identify students from the outside windows without having access into the building. And so the way that those windows are right there, we would have to have what we have out front, correct? With the guards.
But I don't know the exact requirement on that.
That it's and Brian, jump in if I'm speaking out of turn, but that's not a requirement that we're aware of or that we've implemented.
There's a
Elsewhere.
shading requirement for interior glazing on the inside. So if we have large expanses of glazing inside of a classroom that goes into the corridor, for instance, we are required to put a shading device over that can be pulled down some way to close it off, because that's a shelter-in-place criteria. So if there is an incident in the school where you need to shelter students within the classroom, they need to have a way that they can cover up those glazing. So we are trying to balance, and we'll get into that on the interior a little bit, because we'll walk through some of the safety features. We try to balance not having too much glazing on the inside of the building from classrooms, but still providing a little bit for kind of passive visual control outside the rooms. On the exterior of the building, the way that this is situated here, for instance, This front entrance, the drive that goes up to the school, this is the administrative suite right here. So we have principal's offices, we have reception here, and the secure entry vestibule right here. One of the really good things about the way that this is situated is that the administrative suite, so all of those offices, including the receptionist, has complete visual control over everybody coming up to the side. So everybody that's coming into the building, both vehicular and pedestrian, as they're walking up to the front door, they can see everything going on as they're kind of approaching, as well as this entire run down side of the building. So there's really good visual control from that standpoint. Now, when we get back into the classroom wings, we do have windows out of those classrooms that look out onto the green space outside of that. And that is the first that I've heard about trying to shade. They will have shades on those windows for glare control and things like that in the classroom. So we're doing presentations. So there is a way to shut those down if you wanted to kind of obscure vision. But that's primarily for daylight purposes, though.
True. I guess I was just at Madison, I was just in Richmond at their high school, and that's a very relatively new gym that they built there. And if you think about the entrance rolling into the gymnasium and such, and in terms of that facing the outside, this is the parking lot. There, even there, you see that kind of thing. And I thought I was told that partly is also because of school safety. That being able,
Definitely don't have that
right.
right now, because I'm thinking about schools that you can walk up and see into the classroom, so I don't think it must be a requirement.
Okay.
Now, the requirement is that the Senate Bill 1 did require the classroom doors to be covered. But beyond that, there's no actual requirement. And it's not something that I've seen, frankly, in many projects or anything.
Okay, and yeah, if anybody's got a question, just don't hesitate.
Just jump to kind of aerial here, so you can kind of see the overall mapping. So, and we can, this will become more apparent as we get into the floor plan as well, but just in broad brush strokes, so you can kind of, again, the main entry, admin, this kind of main spine of the building, and then these classroom wings that come off. Going back to the kind of orientation piece of it, those wings are both within 15 degrees of due east-west, which allows for the ability to have solar control of the window shading devices that are south facing. They can control that glare, the energy efficiency feature, but also just the comfort and glare feature as well. But kind of, so the educational wings, two-story wings, looking on this end, so this side being anchored by that media center, and this end being anchored by the cafeteria and the gym. There's a media suite as well, and we'll get into that. That will become more apparent.
Just kind of a general note on materials. It's a big building. High schools are big buildings, and so trying to break down the scale, how that looks as you approach it, both from a proportional standpoint, is part of the reason that we have the material breaks that we do. So we have a lot of glazing in areas we would like to have daylight coming into those spaces, daylight. So the large two-story media center, the areas that we have the collab classrooms and the classroom that we'll get into a little bit further when we get into the floor plan are kind of denoted by these kind of taller window components. And then we get into more of the kind of rhythmic standard classroom component windows that are more like punched openings that move down the side. So between the alternating between some of the materials, the way that we frame some of these openings as well with different types of brick, I think is going to really kind of help bring the scale down on that building quite a bit because again, it is big. And so transitioning between having that stone base, then transitioning up to brick is something that's very rooted in a lot of the historic buildings that we have here in Central Kentucky. As Michael mentioned before too, the gabled roof, that kind of steep pitch gabled roof is also something that's very reminiscent of horse barns and things that we see in the agricultural landscape. And so again, this is something that's very fitting for the particular context in which we're building the school. This isn't something that we're building, let's say, like in a more dense urban environment, for instance. But I think in the end, we have something that's a large building that we're able to kind of break down these component piece parts. And I think it'll look really nice. And just on top of that, looking at where we use stone and trying to be cost efficient too, but being able to use that to denote kind of the canopy columns of the front entrance of the building, as well as the rear columns as you come into the bus entrance space, I think will look really good in terms of being able to visually identify entrances very well. So you don't have people trying to, and this is again, this kind of goes back to a safety concern. People trying to go to some, outside door somewhere else. I mean, they're going to know where the entrance to that building is and where they're supposed to go as soon as they pull onto the site.
Brian, you touched on the gable roof, and that might be a good segue.
Oh, yeah.
Introduce Matt, talk about mechanical systems, because that also is giving us an opportunity to house some of those mechanical systems in that space as well. So I'll turn it over to Matt for a moment.
Sure. So, just a general overview. My scope has to do with the site utility, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection portions of the building. So I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of what we're doing there. This is a new site, fairly undeveloped site, so we are extending water, sewer, gas services to the building, as well as new internet phone service. In terms of the fire protection of the building, we are providing a fully sprinkled, 100% sprinkled fire protection system for the most recent code requirements. From a plumbing perspective, we're going to have high efficient gas water heaters that supply the hot water to the building throughout. Domestic water system, new high efficiency flushing fixtures that save water and really kind of cut back on water and sewer costs and the use that schools have with that. From a mechanical standpoint, we are doing a water source heat pump system, which basically uses small units that are connected with water piping throughout the building. And the base bid has a boiler and a cooling tower, so we'll use high efficiency gas boilers to heat the building in the winter and cooling tower outside to cool the building off in the summer. As an alternate for the project, we do have a geothermal system, geothermal well field system. Right now it's proposed to have wells kind of in this back area of the building lot there. One advantage of this particular site is we have a lot of green space, so that made that portion of the project easy. So we do have that as an alternate. It's very high efficient kind of way to do that and works out real well from a design standpoint to design that as an alternate. So in terms of your HVAC, you have those heat pumps. And also for the ventilation system, which is responsible for bringing in the fresh air, which I'm sure you all have had all kinds of conversations. And I even came in and talked with you all about the ventilation and what's required for all of that now. So it will be a new state-of-the-art ventilation system that it's called dedicated demand control ventilation system. And so what that means is it will track as people go into and out of rooms, it will supply the air to where the air is needed. Kind of tracks where people go throughout the building. So it's kind of the state-of-the-art way to deliver ventilation, fresh air, and keep spaces healthy.
Can I ask a question on that one?
Yeah.
Are there any concerns or changes that you need to make in light of COVID and possible other pandemics?
Yes, there's definitely preventative measures you can do. I've got a couple examples. As I presented earlier, there's several different technologies and different ways to attack it, and we can have a more involved discussion later. I don't want to hijack the meeting necessarily, but essentially you can either try to over-ventilate the space, so provide additional ventilation. I did price that option out. I think we could increase the ventilation to the space for somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 add to the project. These are just kind of ballpark numbers. When it comes to disinfection is another option that you can do. They have something called bipolar ionization, which is a newer technology that essentially purifies the air and can break down a virus's ability to spread. That system, I think, could be added to the project for somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000.
What was that one called? I'm sorry.
Bipolar ionization is what it's called. So that's kind of a new and emerging technology, but something that definitely can be used and has been used throughout the area in hospitals and schools throughout the Commonwealth. And then, there's also technologies like UV lights and HEPA filtration units. Personally, I haven't recommended those technologies due to the high cost and the limited outside of a pandemic use. There's not a ton of additional benefits, I guess, where it comes to that. So typically the ionization and increased ventilation are kind of the things that we typically look at.
How would the air circulation at what you have quoted it at already compare to the current high school?
This one?
Yeah.
I haven't done a full survey of exactly how the condition of this high school is, but typically when you have an older building such as this, you'll have a couple of units. As the units age and get older, they become harder and harder to take in the full amount of outside air through. When you get down to it, outside air is a tough thing to bring into a building because when it's 95 degrees or 0 degrees outside, as you can imagine, that's just tough on the equipment. And as equipment ages and gets older, that becomes a problem. It doesn't perform when you're bringing in all that fresh air. And so a lot of times, the fix to that is to reduce that outside air amount. And also what codes have changed gradually over time. And so whereas the new codes now require more outside air than they had previously in the past. And just new controls also allow you to have a little bit more control over, like I said, that state-of-the-art system that we've designed for this high school where the air kind of follows the people throughout the building. That's not something you've got here. So, from an energy use perspective and from a ventilation perspective, like I said, I haven't done a full survey, but given the age of this high school, I'd say it's definitely much improved. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. From the electric side, we're going to do all new LED lighting throughout the school. Very high efficient technology. It really greatly reduces the energy use across what you use in your typical school district. Voice assisted fire alarm system, new security system. Upgraded security's come a long way in recent years and really kind of got some good upgrades in terms of just what you can do with cameras and the secure entry vestibules and some of that stuff. So upgrading those systems. And then last thing, just have a new AV audio visual system in the auditorium, cafeteria, media center, and the gym. Kind of this sort of stuff, technology, applying the most recent technology across the new high school. Kind of the idea there. That is my portion of the scope. Are there any other questions before I take a seat? About that. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. So just gonna jump back in here, look at the overall site plan for a second. And so what we're showing on this slide is the base bid. We'll jump into the next slide and show the whole master plan, showing planning for the future. But this is, and let me start by clarifying because you'll hear base bid and alternates throughout, and this is not language that many folks are familiar with. So let me try to clarify. So when we're setting up a project bid, typically we set up the base bid as kind of the minimal scope of the project. That is, when you're setting up bid alternates for a project, you're getting them priced separately in addition to the overall. So the base bid constitutes the overall, and then you're identifying alternates which are additive to that. And you always want alternates to be additive and not subtractive because you won't get as good of a credit from a contractor as opposed to an add. That's just the way construction is set up. So all bid alternates are always additive. So the base bid represents the kind of core of the project, and then there are things that you can add on to it through alternates. And we'll be going into those alternates or at least the proposed alternates, and that will be something that we will be asking for your feedback.
So what we're looking at is, so we were to build a school tomorrow, this is what we would, this is the bid we have right now. is what you're saying.
Yeah, so when we're talking base bid, yep, that's the core of it. It doesn't get less than that.
Right.
But there are options to add through the audit.
And I know this is something that we've heard on the forward side of things, but can you tell people a little bit about how a bid works? And, you know, the numbers that you have projected versus how it works on bid day?
Well, sure. I mean, of course, we have the advantage on this project of be working with the construction manager, and they're able. So, in addition to an architect's opinion of cost, you are also getting good feedback from them along the way, and they'll certainly talk in much more detail than I'll be able to about the bidding environment currently. That's kind of coming up here shortly. We'll get into that, but you know, we are looking at these are opinions of cost. We're you know, construction cost is a fluctuating thing, and so we make our best projections, and then come bid day, you kind of see how the numbers come in.
I just wanted to add something before you did.
Sure.
So we regularly have days where we're working with the architect team because there's two bid opening dates. There's a bid opening date that he opens his construction bid, which determines the cost. But then there's a bid date on my date when we actually lock in the borrowing rate. And those dates are usually a few weeks apart. So we work with school districts, and they'll open their bids and say, we'd like to include these alternates. And then on the bond sale date, we see if that can afford in your capacity with alternates. So there's kind of, it's a lot of moving parts, but that's what having a team can kind of guide you through the process. And I just want to note that there's a date where they can say these alternates make, you know, fit in what we think. And then there's a date where I actually implement the bonding, your bonding capacity to see if that is within the sale.
That's a great point. With the market thing, what they have been recently, those 5 weeks or so, that, you know, potentially, you know, you could see.
So we were ready to take 7 alternates.
All right, thank you. That's a great point. So yeah, just looking at the overall site plan here for the base bid. So here is that footprint of the high school itself. This is Schoolhouse Road. The middle school is just right here, just off the screen, to the south there. This is Tyrone Pike to the north, and in terms of connections to the road, so there are 2 connections to Schoolhouse Road and 1 connection to Tyrone Pike. This is the property boundary here. So there is a potential there to connect. And so the first loop that you're seeing here to the south was the one that we saw in that overall rendering. That's the parent drop-off loop as well as the visitor parking. So that all visitors would be coming in from this side and entering in that kind of front door that we saw from the rendering. Coming around to the north portion of the site, there are kind of two lots here that don't touch. So the student parking and band practice area here, and then the bus loop and staff parking areas here. And they're organized along an axis where students and staff can feed in from both of these parking lots and then feed back into this north entry of the building. So both visitors and staff and students are coming along the same axis, but from 2 different directions on the site. Additionally, from this bus loop side, there is a service entrance, and so there's a connection both to the kitchen, the dumpsters, deliveries, things of that nature, as well as the CPE program, the ag shop, things that need that access, kind of a service entry coming along that side as well. This slide is looking at a master plan. So looking out into the future, what could be added, looking far out into the future. So, you know, additional parking, potentially a future field house. We'll get into options, the alternate and other future options on the football field. Baseball, softball, tennis, kind of rounding out things. I won't mention that there are a few unique features on the site, like there's actually a pond here and actually a blue line stream that is actually running along here. So there are some restrictions to the north there. So you're not seeing anything kind of right up against that north boundary, and that's why that is.
Did that change after the survey, or has that always been the cap?
That's always been the case, but we just got a little more information in terms of what was actually there, and more accurate information. Yeah. Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian and kind of have him walk you through the floor plan.
Can you tell the committee a little bit about how the floor plan was chosen? There's very little overlap.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So
may not be able to.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So to kind of step way back, kind of pre-schematic design on this project, we had a leadership committee that worked with us during the course of multiple programming meetings. So we kind of set out, we did walkthroughs of the existing high school on multiple different occasions. We met with teachers and staff throughout that process in several different meetings, took lots of notes, listened to a lot of concerns about the existing facility, what they'd like to see changed for the new facility. And all of that was kind of filtered through the lens of the leadership committee and all of the meetings that we attended to that. So the way that we started out was trying to identify major goals of the project kind of early on. We started to look at how the high school functions in its current state, how we see that functioning as a more of a 21st century learning environment with the teachers and staff that we have kind of in place. We talked about all the specific locations, all the specific needs of media centers, things like that as we walk through. And based on the allowable square footage that we have for the building and the KDE model program for a high school of this size, is how we kind of started to develop the floor plans for this based off of diagrams that we developed during the programming phase. We ended up with two strong schemes for the future high school. And we ultimately kind of whittled down, we had lots of conversations about the benefits of each one of those. And we ultimately landed on this particular iteration of that. And part of the reason we landed on this is that we felt that the access, the way that the academic portion of the building worked, kind of centered around that media center kind of component at the elbow, the areas that we had kind of for breakout spaces, multi-purpose kind of hybrid learning environments, the commons areas, worked really well in this particular format. We also felt that there's less kind of overall walking traffic going to and from classes, both vertically up and down from the stairs and also just kind of the overall length of the building. And so at the end of the day, the group elected to go with this particular scheme as we move forward. And then from there, we started to look at the exterior of the building as well. And so looking at different schemes for how this starts to shape up. And so the renderings that we showed at the very beginning are kind of where we landed with that. So something that's a little bit more in the traditional vein of architectural design, but still making its presence known as a cutting edge educational facility. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just thought it was important to.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
Did you visit any other schools? Did you visit any other schools to get ideas, concepts?
As an entire leadership committee,
Yes.
we did not, as a total group. Now there were board members that had made visits to facilities that they were aware of. I think we had people at Gracie part of Cutler, and
Another year.
they visited. There was a group that was down at Bowling Green also, as well as Hvac. And there may have been some that went to the new Scotland as well. But no, as an entire group, kind of walking through as a kind of a curated guided book, no, we did not visit. So to kind of start out, there's a lot of spaces in this building. So we kind of color coded things that, the green, this light green color pertains to the gymnasium and the athletic spaces of the building. The yellow is all circulation. So kind of corridor spaces, stairs, things like that, breakout spaces off of those main circulation patterns. Red is for the media center. And then most of the blue colors, so this light blue color is what we're considering standard classrooms. So that's your language arts, that's your science, or sorry, not science, math, English, those spaces. And then the dark blue are specialty spaces. So band, orchestra, the F&B classrooms, art, things like that. So we we color code the buildings this way, so it's a little bit easier to read kind of bulk spaces where the majority of kind of building components are located. The way that we approached this particular layout is what we thought was one of the strengths about this particular layout of the plan is that we had a very distinct separation between what we consider the community function spaces and the academic spaces of the high school. So you look at this line kind of right here, that kind of demarcation line between the community function spaces of the building and the academic function spaces of the building. What's nice about separating it like that is that this whole area here can be locked off. And so this area can be used for after hours events. So basketball games, future auditorium events, community functions that might want to use these large spaces that we have as part of the cafeteria, kind of multi-purpose area, as well as the gymnasium. They have access to the kitchen, as well as the band orchestra spaces. So I think that that's a really strong component of the particular layout of this building. Again, the sets of doors here. That way you can have community functions, things like that going on after hours, very flexible without having people kind of moving through the academic areas that are not occupied at the time. So when we look at the academic portion of the building, this whole wide-shaped wing is anchored down here at the elbow with the media center. So one of the things that we like about the other scheme that we showed is that the media center was really kind of the heart of the entire school building. And in this scheme, it's the heart of that kind of academic core of the building. So students have kind of equal access from both the classroom wings to that space. It also offers areas that kind of break out and extend that media center function to multi-purpose kind of hybrid learning commons areas, as well as kind of some of the engineering lab spaces. The standard classroom wings that we have here, this floor is a little bit different because we have some CPE space on this wing, but in general, these wings are kind of reserved for standard classroom spaces, and we've kind of set that up into a subject matter wing allocation. So sometimes schools want those broken down into grade levels and things like that. In this particular instance, we're doing that on subject matter, so we have an English area, we have a math area, language arts, etc. So one of the ways that we approach this, and actually, Sarah, do you want to click on one of the classroom wing down here and plants out? I can just kind of walk through that really quickly. So the standard classroom wing, you'll see a set of doors here that lock down that wing, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about school safety features of this particular building. So this is kind of what we would consider a standard classroom wing. So we have at this particular instance, social studies wing. There's also some resource classrooms here. The art classroom is located here because it has to have north light access for KTE. So it has access there as well as a door outside the art patio area. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll get let into Google Meets, we have to.
Yeah. That's fine.
So while you're doing that question, are these kind of some, this is my first time really knowing about the building. So are these kind of the final, not the final, but I mean, is this like is this gonna be the crux of the building, or is there gonna be room for us to kind of make more suggestions on kind of things we want?
So we have gone through the floor plans a couple different times during kind of schematic design as well as design development phase with, I don't know how else you want to talk about moving forward from here. So I guess that's a bigger question for the leadership. But we have looked at this both at each of the phases of the projects for project sign off, and then we've also had times where we interacted with staff during some of our kind of future programming meetings after the programming phase. So we've walked through and we've had quite a bit of feedback on these floor plans to get to this point and where we are now. But I think that certainly that's part of the reason that this leadership committee exists is to be able to elicit feedback as we move forward. Absolutely.
That's one thing I'm seeing, Dennis, is like our enrollment goes up. Where are there opportunities with each wing to expand your classrooms? So like I'm struggling a little bit today, but like when I look at that, I don't see where is there an opportunity to add another teacher in the social studies department should our enrollment go up and necessitates the adding of another position.
That was part of why we chose the design that we did on that. And then to answer your question too, Mr. Johnson, yes, there is still time for feedback and things, and that is a lot of what we wanted to do with this. And this group, the charge is to come up with decisions to propose for the board to make the final decision and act. But yes, feedback is.
Because I said, I mean, I've been a part of this when I had another middle school I was at, and they really didn't consult us. And so when it was done, we was like, man, and we wish we could have, like the other teachers that I taught with, we just did real, I was PE and doing the gym. And we wanted to go see a few other spots. Now we got what they built to do was like, we didn't make the modification. So I just think us being able to see, and I'm speaking school and really athletic, I'm the athletic director as well. If we could see some more stuff, and I know I've been out of town and seen the people, so we took some pictures, so I would like to be able to, maybe some of those stuff we can incorporate and say, you know, because I was in Georgia last week and I talked to you guys, like, what do you like about this part? What do you don't like? So some things we might be able to incorporate to make ours better.
Yeah, we're certainly, I mean, you're absolutely open to walking through it. If there's another time you want to look at specifically the athletic component to that within the building, you can certainly review that again with everybody.
And they have some information on what we currently have, because sometimes it's hard to look at this and see how does this compare to what we have right now. That was something that we really struggled with, having that scale. Like this could be a house plan or it could be a high school. If you lack that architectural experience, that was hard for the committee. And so they have drawings of what we currently have, especially with the athletic facility and the wrestling room and things like that, that you could compare side by side. And that might be helpful for you to see. I know one of the things that they, after meeting with Ms. Hamilton and with you, they increased the size of the training room.
Yep.
And things like that, and trying to be responsive. And they spent a few days here meeting all day with different committee heads or different area heads to try and be responsive on that, you know, tweak the design. But yeah, that was.
I mean, time, like,
You know, we can do
Absolutely. This is the time,
Yeah.
you know, let's don't
Well, I'm
make,
waiting on
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talked about, so this building is, if this building, its enrollment, you know, increases by a much larger amount, the building's able to kind of flex and hold from a capacity standpoint. One of the things that we like about this particular option is we have the ability to expand these wings. We have a lot of space out on the side, so if in the future we ran into a situation where like we are way undersized in this facility, we need to add, you know, let's say 4 classrooms is kind of a typical add-on, small add-on for a building. So we have 2 stories, 2 classrooms, first floor, 2 classrooms, second floor. And we can do that right now, for instance, the way that this is set up, because we have stairs that are located at the end of the corridor. So from an egress standpoint, that works out really well. And so then if you were to add on more than that, we're talking about adding additional stairs and things like that. But yes, part of the reason that this particular iteration was selected was because we had more room to grow out with these wings than the other scheme did, without kind of trying to explain the other scheme.
Well, and the other scheme, the aesthetics change so much when you add it up to it. And that might be a good thing. I mean, we can talk a little bit about how KDE sets the stockings.
No, you can't, it goes beyond.
Right. And
Yeah.
Mr. Hawkins can certainly speak to how our enrollment.
Well, and just a couple points on that. And actually, we had some conversations with KDE recently based on our LPC work. We can go to 1,400 now.
Okay.
And so I do think that piece needs to be incorporated to go ahead and add that classroom space on the front end. Because now they're projecting that our school age population is going to grow over the next 25 years. And that was from the U of L studies that they always utilize. So
It had been 1250,
1350.
1350, so it went up by.
So we can add at least a couple more classrooms to get to that 1,400. And
But it's one more classroom, for sure. And we can analyze, go into the details, because there's a few different ways to kind of skin it, you know? But, for
I
sure.
think Gary told me too, so that's why I was going with
Okay, yeah,
two, because of the
it's-
50 kids.
I took a look at it, and it's definitely more.
Okay.
To go from 1350 to 1400.
Basically,
And then beyond that, I'll say 1 to 2, depending on the way that you're kind of presenting. So,
But the one real positive that I don't think I was aware of, that I think this committee could really take a look at, to Coach Johnson's point, is that you can go to 120% of the model program square footage. So we could actually go to about 225,000 square feet to be able to meet the needs of, if we feel like there are some other things that we want to take a look at. And I don't know that I ever really understood that through this whole process, but that became very clear. And I actually talked to Gary Least about that. And so,
Say that again, you can go to 120% of the model.
of the model program square footage. And so that gives you a lot more flexibility, you know, because I've had some conversations with Sarah about the gym. And is there a way that we could incorporate some other things to make it a little bit more useful to multiple groups? And having visited a lot of gymnasiums over my years, there are some really cool features that could be used by multiple groups at the same time. Whereas this, you can pretty well have one group at a time in there utilizing it. But you would have to expand the square footage in order to be able to do that. Well, you've got room with that extra 20% to add that square footage, because you,
Go ahead.
for example, if you look at, and we were just at Martha Lane Collins High School, they have an area up top that basically is a track around the top.
Yeah.
And I asked Kevin about that, and back when this was still being designed, and he basically told me I couldn't do it.
Because of the size constraint.
Right.
Okay.
And so, but you can expand the square footage on this. And so what you're allowed to do is you have bleachers on the top that can then be pushed back.
Yes.
And so you have quite a bit of space on top that could be utilized by multiple groups. And if you, and you know, for example, our track kids, if it rains outside, they're running the halls here. They could actually run upstairs. You could have cheerleaders practice upstairs on that, you know, on the one side. So it's just a really cool concept in that you could, if you wanted to open it up to the community in the wintertime where they could walk in the evenings, they would have a space to walk.
So it would be similar to the walking track at Bowling Springs?
It's
Kind of
similar,
open gyms.
it's similar in that it's more squared as opposed to being round.
But I mean, the same premise of looking
same-
down towards below.
Absolutely. And then you could do bleachers that would push back to the wall.
On that floor.
On the top.
What we would call it. So yeah, so we were looking at this, I can explain real quick. What we had looked at with Kevin at the time was, this is the second floor, so looking down, the main bank of bleachers right now is hidden in this particular view. But what you see on the first floor is actually this section right here and not the above section. So what we have done on other projects, GRC's new gym is one of them, is that this bank, just like Scott said, this bank back here is a retractable bleacher system that pulls back towards the wall. And they can go either way. So actually at GRC, we have it pulled up to the front so they can have cheerleading practice back here. But the theory is that you can run a track, you can build out a track component that goes all the way around this. The trick to this is access to it, right? So we have to have egress off of that, so stairs and then up there, I believe we're going to have an elevator as well, access to that. Right now, the way that we're accessing this upper bank is by the lower bank of bleachers, which is a retractable set. So the lower bank on both sides is retractable, it pulls back to the wall, and you can have a full-on kind of cross-court basketball doing that. If you had a divider down the middle of this, you could have kind of two separate uses of the gym simultaneously. Now, when you have a game, for instance, you want to use the full, you know, right at almost 2,000 seats, you would hold these out to the floor. Competition gym is across, there's a competition center across here, and you actually go up these egress components to access the upper roof.
So like a more traditional, kind of what we're all,
It's, right, so
Right, in
what
the-
he's saying is
in the-
that this top
if you-
thing.
If
can
you were
retract these
utilizing all the bleachers, it would look like a normal gym.
back. Exactly, yep,
Most of the time, you wouldn't even have to use the top level. You could have them pushed back
that's correct, yeah.
and leave them pushed back. PE classes, you could have multiple PE classes utilizing the gym at the same time. And so that's where I say it serves multiple purposes. And I think because we can extend that square footage, we've got an opportunity, if that's something that, and again, I'm glad Dennis asked the question about, can we look at some different things? To me, that would be one thing that I think would be hugely positive with a lot of groups. And so, again, I've seen it at multiple places, and I mean, it gets used all the time. And isn't that what you want, a facility, in terms of its purpose? And so, but again, I understand you'd probably have to have an elevator down there, but also expanding square footage. Is there an opportunity to potentially have more things along corridors underneath the bleachers where you could maybe have additional locker rooms or those types of things that.
Right now, we're showing the lockers on both sides, so boys and girls, there's a set on each side, so main kind of PE lockers, but also
Right.
Sports,
Right.
related lockers. That's how we're using that, because we find that is the best strategy for making this an efficient, cost efficient, and spatially efficient
Sure.
building. If this got expanded, we're talking about, expanding by stair towers, we kind of anchor that, so you wouldn't really be able to expand the lockers in that direction.
Okay.
But that would be something that we could look at, and we could show what that would look like from a floor plan standpoint on both levels, if we were to pursue that.
and then obviously the cost change.
Right.
is
Yeah.
something we
And
have.
then just to clarify, so we do have quite a bit of leeway programmatically for KDE in order to add things to this building. Our real constraint here and that will become more of the focus as we go along, is budget. And so, that's really, and that's the point of kind of what we're doing, try to present in terms of where are we, what are projected costs, what are potential alternates, and how do those all stack up, and what is the ultimate budget as compared to bonding capacity? I mean, that's really what we're trying to look at.
And if I could just take a minute here, and because I think all of us sitting around this room understand we need a new high school. But the point you just made, Michael, is concerning to me. Because what it means is we're trying to build what we can afford. And I'm concerned that we're not really saying, what is it that we want? And in meetings that I have attended, when I've asked questions, the response has been, because this is cheaper. And that worries me. It worries me because we're trying to build a building for 50 million at potentially 1,400 students. And right next door, they just approved a design for a 1,500 school that's 70 million.
Which school is that?
Scott County High School, with a total campus of 90. And so I just worry that we are looking at this. I mean, this is a once in a generation opportunity. And I think we have to get it right. And I would much rather us go through this process. And my suggestion would be to say, let's really dive into the design and say, what is it that we want? Because we want an auditorium. And it's part of the model program, but it's an alternate. We desperately need a track and a practice field, but it's an alternate. I think the geothermal is without a doubt the best HVAC system that we could utilize. And it's an alternate. the flooring that is still really good right out here today, 65 years after this building opened, is an alternate. And so I really wish we could take a step back and say, what is it that we want in this building? It may be way more than we can afford, but at least we know this is what we want. This is what we want for our kids and for our community. And that's my heart. And I just hope that as a committee, we can do that. You know, when I was in the meeting, we talked about the HVAC system, and you shared that not every room is going to have its own unit. I just don't think that's acceptable. I think every classroom needs to have its own unit. And to be able to control the temperature within their room. And so I just, while I desperately want a new building, I want us to get the one that we want. And not just what we can afford. Because my fear is 5-10 years down the road, we're going to look back and we're going to say, I wish we had done this. And we don't get a do-over, not with a $50 to $60 million project. So I'll be quiet.
No, and I think it's very valuable to have that input. The crux of the situation is where we have been, you know, with a failed nickel and with a need that continues. And the knowledge that construction is never going to be less expensive than it is right now, and bonding rates are at an all-time low. Is the cost of inaction greater than the cost of action? And I agree with everything that you said, Scott. I think we have to get it right. And as much time as it takes to get it right is the right thing. But without a solution to increase our bonding by $25 million or $20 million, I don't know how we get there. And then we have kids sitting in this high school for an undetermined amount of years to come with nothing getting better. Because putting money into this high school isn't a good investment. We know that. We talked to tons of different groups that all said, that's not the answer. You're putting new parts in a 1965 car. You know, and it's not a positive, you know?
It is a quandary.
It is.
It really is. And at the end of the day, additional revenue is needed. And I think it would be wise for us to look at what are options for that. You know, I wish we could pass an ordinance that would allow us to do a restaurant tax.
I'll advise against that.
That's not recallable. I mean, I'm just joking, but I don't know what the answer is, but I do know the answer is not to rush and build something just to say we built something.
And I don't think that's the flip side of this. I don't think that it's a rush to say that. It's that obviously everyone sitting here knows we need a new high school. And we have to find a path to getting there. And I am all in for looking at, you know, we've talked about trying to find sponsors. I know that Clark County did that. And, you know, what happened with this project, to kind of recap too, is we started this and then a pandemic happened that nobody saw coming. That kind of shelved everything, because what are the resources that we need to allocate toward that? And the board made a decision to put everything on pause. And then we had a new board election, and we got 2 great new members with new, fresh perspectives. And we're at this point now where let's have this meeting and let's start these discussions so that we know where this project needs to go and how it needs to get there. I can say for myself only, I can't speak for the board, but I am open to any ideas on how to get more funding. I don't know what will have changed to try and roll out another nickel tax. I have seen nothing to indicate that it would be a different result. And unfortunately, we spent a substantial amount of money the first go round to try and roll it out in the right way and to try and tell people, hey, here's the benefits of this tax that we're proposing. But people don't want to vote for their own taxes to go up. And the fact that the state puts that forward as the only way for schools to get that nickel to build the buildings that we so desperately need, it's just an untenable thing. And I did reach out to our legislators this session and ask, hey, if there's any chance that you have money that can go for a one-time project, please think about Woodford County. We've got a project in the pipeline, we're ready to go. We need a little bit of help. And unfortunately, I don't think that was the case this year. But if anyone has those ideas, they're certainly welcome.
What happened, like, what's a little bit of backstory about sponsor?
The sponsorship was something that we had discussed. Like I said, Clark County has done that very effectively. I know you can sell a sponsorship for everything. We could have the Scott Hawkins math classroom, the Dennis Johnson wrestling room, as long as you have someone willing to pay that. You can't do you can't do alcohol or tobacco.
Well, and the board would have to develop a policy
Right.
that would set the parameters. So in other words, I can't give $100 and have something named after me.
Sure.
You've got to give them, you got to develop what percentage would be required to have something named after you. Colleges do this a lot, with buildings and capital projects that they do. You see it a lot more on athletic facilities or a lab or auditorium or something along those lines. It's usually a more of a public space where you would see it.
Was there a team put together to truly pursue it?
We had one established, and then we had some personnel changes. And again, the pandemic happened, but it's definitely something that we can revisit. And
I mean, in my mind, if there's anything that the pandemic illustrated and clarified for us is the role of the school in the community. And I think that's valued. I think that's acknowledged and valued and to be celebrated. And in Woodford County, one thing that is clear too is how the community invests in the school. And whether or not have we truly, and we definitely pandemic have and everything shut down, but have we totally gone down that road and investigated possibly solving this gap? We're talking about roughly about $20 million. So that, because I personally struggle looking at this and not seeing something, and maybe it's just my eyes, I am struggling here over here with this map, but I don't see places for our maintenance, right? Like I like, where's the maintenance part here that they have their own space?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, it's probably because of my eyes that I can't see. Yeah, I'm like looking for like the space in terms of like, where's it all at on this? But I struggle with the fact that the auditorium is an alternative. It hadn't taught, but there's just some things that good, and I get it all. And as a taxpayer, I get it all.
Well,
Living with
we don't have an auditorium. And this gets all of our student body into a brand new classroom building with a brand new gym and all new state-of-the-art equipment. That is not where we're at. I totally agree. I want an auditorium. I want to be able to do everything. But we have to figure this all out. That's why we're meeting, and hopefully we can work through some of these things.
I would love to see this committee pursue that and to be able to walk away from it, to say that we have investigated every single as far as we could with the sponsorship.
But I think Brian and Grayson can probably weigh in here with valuable perspectives on how often do you find people that are willing to either donate or, I know, I think we actually had this very discussion during the leadership committee Because the perception is we have all of these horse that have bazillions of dollars. Surely if we go ask, they'll get on board. And I think, Brian, you can address that. I'm sure Grayson, you have experience as well.
It is a lot more difficult than it seems. One challenge we have here, probably our most generous industry is the alcohol industry, which we cannot, if legally, probably responsibly, couldn't take. That's a big challenge here. It'd be easier at the government level because we could take that. And they have been generous with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's how much money we're talking about, you know, if it's making up that difference of $20 million, if it's like anything, I don't think it's like to carry it, even. Because really, the horse industry is not doing as well as the bourbon industry.
Well, and we do see urban incomes indirectly. Obviously, schools have the benefit of the student experience taxes, and now the Federal Reserve is building things that's gonna help us.
That's gonna help, I'm sure. Not anything sponsorships will work for soon, but probably, like Brian said, more difficult than it's going.
And I know this is a really, really tough process, and it's hard to sit back and look at things that need to be made alternates, in order to kind of rein things in from a budgetary perspective. I would like to add though, at the same time, that this is a hell of a building. I mean, this is not a second-rate educational facility by any stretch of the word, the United States. I mean, when we walked into this from the standpoint of we're going to create a master plan for a high school for Woodford County. We're going to talk about the budget kind of component later on. That's where we had to make difficult decisions. We got down to that point, but the foundation, the core of this building is rooted in those programming meetings that we had very early on, working with the staff and everybody in the district to develop what would be a really great master plan for people. So when we look at that, there's an auditorium here. It just had to be made a call during the kind of during the BE kind of budgetary process that we went through. And I know a lot of the things about here that we are,
and none of these have been decided upon. And I think that the point is for us to present what do we have? What are projected costs right now? What do these alternates look like? What are their costs? What happens when you start putting together combinations of things? And what are we talking? What kind of deltas are we actually at right now? And that's really the point of this meeting. I would echo that we don't think of this at all as kind of a bare minimum facility. I would argue that the flexibility of the classroom in this facility are second to none. And worked on a number of kind of innovative projects, and I would say that there are aspects of this design that are absolutely fantastic, that are better than anything you're going to see anywhere around, right? But that being said, we have constraints in terms of the budget that we need to talk. But I do think it's important to see what's here. So let us kind of continue on. Let's present what's here. Let's describe the alternatives we're attaching costs to them, and I think we'll all get a better understanding of where we are and options that we have moving forward.
So just to kind of, and I don't want to spend too much time kind of getting the weeds on the floor plans, but one of the big ideas about this particular project is that there's a really strong CT program here at Woodford County High School. The culinary labs, I mean, it's like one of the most popular, elective classes that students take, and that's fantastic. Where is it? It's all the way down to the end of the corridor where nobody kind of walks through it. So when we look at kind of putting education on display in a facility like this, one of the things that we want to do is bring some of the interesting programs kind of up front of the building, so students are kind of passing by that. So we look at having the culinary programs here kind of anchored near more of a community function part of the program, but everybody's kind of passing through. I think those are some of those incredible spaces in schools to be able to kind of see that tech kind of component as you move through. Again, we talk about leveraging the amount of availability for kind of interior glazing and that connection to the corridor. So we've got smaller kind of sets of windows, but it still allows kind of use into those spaces. And also, areas where students can kind of be pulled off the side to hide if need be. The other way that we approach this too is that this large lobby that everybody's kind of filming from the bus drop-off area. There's a stair that's located here that students can skip. So everybody that's going out to the first floor class keeps going up this way. Anybody going to the second floor can split off at that lobby and move upstairs. We have arranged the main kind of corridor. If you go back to the overall, the main classroom wings as they break off of the main kind of corridor here. The corridor is wider and it tapers, it steps down after the co-lab. So as students are to start to filter into those classrooms, there's less of a need to have a giant corridor kind of at the end of the hallway. One of the things that we talked about very early on with both staff and students is that there's a lot of pinch points in this existing building. There's a lot of kind of tightness between the corridors. Areas are upstairs, so trying to alleviate that by some of these kind of architectural structural measures in the building. Again, I'm not going to go back through all the standard kind of classroom components, but we also have some of the heavier duty CPE components that need direct exterior access. So the ag lab, for instance, there, if you want to blow that up real quick. We have 2 large ag classrooms that feed into a large ag shop on the back side of the building. We have welding booths, there's storage here. There's a large overhead door that connects directly to where we have a greenhouse on this side right here. Engineering is split right now between 2 separate labs. There's what we're calling the dirty lab, which is a large kind of, think of like a big wood shop type space. Heavier duty equipment has a lot of like validation requirements for that. That's here. And so there's some shared synergy between these programs right now. So like welding, for instance, if there's somebody in the engineering class that needs to be welding, this we situate these, they have kind of quick access over those spaces, as well as an engineering classroom, language arts here, and then as well as the business and the marketing classrooms down here. There's a central co-lab, and you'll see that on all the other classroom wings. That is an open type classroom here. So we have different types of furnishings in the space. It is set up to allow for student presentation. It's a large breakout space that can handle a full-size classroom worth of students in that space. Flooded with daylight, additional areas for storage. But this is something that we're starting to see, obviously, a lot more of as we really start to hone down some of the. We're seeing a lot of that kind of hybrid learning environment being really valuable. We talk about it day to day, flexibility in terms of the educational environment, project or educational delivery, but also being able to respond to changes. Having the breakout spaces off of these classrooms allows students to kind of go out in smaller groups and work kind of outside the classroom and still have kind of direct passive control of the instructor inside. But it allows a lot more flexibility within the learning environment to adapt to changes, both from educational delivery model, but also things like the pandemic, when you need more space. So more places where students can learn from distance and things like that. Each of the classroom wings, we have 2 sets of classrooms that have operable panel partitions between them, again, for to support areas that we may want to do for coaching, things like that. Large groups, so again, kind of adding to the versatility of your learning environment there. You mentioned mechanical spaces or maintenance spaces, so we have a ton of that throughout the building. Anything that you see as the dark gray color right here is either going to be an electrical room component, a mechanical room. So think of all the mechanical systems, access to that. We have maintenance storage as well throughout the building. So this one in particular here is servicing the elevator. Then we have a large mechanical room that has HVAC equipment, as well as the electrical component here.
I guess what I'm thinking of more is that, like, are these like what we consider these storage, right, that are right down the hallway for them to store supplies? Do I see any offices for our maintenance? Like their place for that, or like, does that make sense? Is it like this trim here that you're showing me on this, or do I see like office area that for our maintenance staff needs?
So
Okay.
Michael,
So I was just gonna say, that's kind of the equivalent of their like landing portion that's up here. This is like much more generous than that space. And you see it also has a ship's ladder up to a mechanical mezzanine, and that's where Max bringing in all of his good fresh air. And so that gable form, if you see that's actually a little that happens over this portion, and there's actually an additional kind of piece that sticks out here for this large piece of equipment that brings in that fresh air to the building. So that mechanical, that kind of maintenance and mechanical spaces, both on that level and another level above that service that, mechanical equipment.
And again, we have separate mechanical rooms, as well, just for the classroom. But there's a lot of space for additional kind of equipment storage and things like that as needed throughout this building. Yeah, I think let's finish the first one really fast, sorry. So again, media center down here, so this has kind of forms that elbow component of the academic wing here. We have this space kind of broken up into more of the traditional media center components, so we'll have areas for faculty, we've got computer desk areas, student reading areas, we've got these kind of bench insets that have a lot of kind of daylight coming into those spaces, but really great area to kind of pull back in small groups, read by yourself, work on a project. And so we saw a lot of that when we were doing our walkthroughs of the building, how this space gets used by the students as is. And so trying to take that and then take that, 10 steps forward, and make that a really successful space. Here we have a more of a flexible kind of classroom component, so we have large meetings, things like that, in that space as well. And then obviously access to technology, monitors, things like that for presentations.
Brian, can you explain the media center?
Explain the media center?
Well,
Just in terms of, it's the library.
yeah.
I mean, that's what we call library. And it's an evolution of the use of that space to be much more than just kind of books on shelves, right? So we're talking about spaces where students have access to kind of digital media, they have access obviously to analog media, like you see here. And also it's a place where you can be in a quiet area, so students that need to come before class and catch up on an assignment, they want to work in a small group together on a project, things like that. They have that space to do this and a lot of different variation on that. We're not showing the furnishings in here, but there's a furnishing layout that supports that.
Maybe we're talking about the conference.
Sure.
And thought on the sidelines for teachers for safety.
Yes. So here, we also have, directly outside of the media center, we have an area that we're calling the kind of commons. Again, when I talked about the kind of like hybrid learning environment space, this is one of those. It's an area where students can do kind of large presentations. You can fit more than one classroom worth of students here in this space. We have different types of furnishings in here, so kind of a range between, high top, low top, soft, hard seating. And what I think is also great about this type of space is that it's multi-use in terms of you can do a ton of different things with it. We have the way that we have it situated off of the engineering kind of computer science lab has a lot of opportunity to kind of open this up and expand that program, project-based learning exercises. And its location in the corridor, one of the things that we talked with the students about early on was they don't have a lot of place to kind of socialize and kind of touch down, pull off into groups and kind of have a conversation between classes. And so we want to be able to support that component of learning also with the new facility. So having these, what I call kind of any spaces where students can kind of pull up the main area of traffic and meet as a group and kind of have that kind of social time is also really important in facilities like this. We also look at this too from a sightline standpoint, and I'll get in. I mean, I can walk through school safety until I'm blue in the face on this, but in general, what we're trying to do is create a system where we have a series of layers of protection in the building. And one of those things being sightlines. So making sure that instructors and staff have the ability to see all the way down corridors. In many cases, if you're standing here, you can see down 2 large corridors. So we don't have a lot of blind spots in this building at all. And so one of the things we talk about school safety, I mean, everybody talks about the shelter in place requirements, things like that. We also have a storm shelter component. We also talk about things like bullying and what things that we can do from an architectural intervention component to reduce those kind of hidden corner spaces of the building, open entrances to bathrooms, making sure the stair towers are kind of open stairs so people aren't kind of hiding behind closed doors and things like that. So there's a lot that kind of goes into that conversation about sightlines and making sure that there's a lot of visibility within the building.
2 questions.
Sure.
The first one is really probably the next one that is, but lockers or storage space for stuff they could bring with them every day.
Very, very few. And one of the, I think, 20 lockers we have to
I said last year, 20 lockers.
I know, I paid for one for my kid, we never used.
It is, thank you, I still do it.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing cost as we're too, and we've done surveys and things like that in the past, and it's gotten to the point where the numbers coming back are so few that we're usually providing a little more than we think will get used, but still just in strategic places, and those become, and actually therapies, went back in on that media center, that collab area, that's actually one of the spots.
It has a low, there's a countertop space where you can plug phones and things like that, devices, and below that we have a locker bank there as well. So, there is a need for some lockers. I mean, if you have a student athlete, you know, break an ankle or something, they're in a cast, and so lugging things around is an option. So having that type of, we have to have that type of function and that type of flexibility for students.
Is he up
It's right.
Yeah. Just put his hand.
Nice day. Perfect day.
Yeah. But I think using those lockers as like single instead of double stack, all on the corridor, using those as actual spaces that you can plug in a device. For example, because that's what students will need between classes, or we have classes like parts of the device and hang out and use that countertop of the lockers as a place to be, right? So creating a destination around lockers as opposed to, it's just a big corridor of lockers.
sort of the layout and the designs of the classrooms to allow for, the 20 backpack differences?
The backpack question very often comes up as well, and past projects I've worked with the furnishings to actually provide hooks on the tables to provide that. Checking back in on those projects, it turns out those typically don't get used very much either. Interestingly, so it's very interesting how.
We've been seeing a lot of the, in some of the more recent schools, there's been a push also for kind of mobile furnishings in the classroom spaces, again, kind of aiding that kind of versatility of the space. And a lot of those desk seat combinations actually have that kind of large pan under it for backpacking stores and things like that for students. So
it's turning into the furnishings,
Yeah.
basically, as opposed to the building itself.
Which actually leads into my second question, just lack of my knowledge of what's in the bid. Does the bid include furniture and fixtures?
And we will go into some detail on that, and as opposed, so there's a construction cost that we'll talk about, and then there are separate, we call them soft costs, and those are everything else that goes into the pricing program, including furnishing, including everything from bonding discount to the furnishings, to the computers, our fees, just every single thing else that goes into the cost of the building. But that's a separate kind of line item that we'll zero in compared to the construction.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, we are at 8.
Okay.
And we need to get to.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question on the,
Sure, yeah.
if you could go back up? What's the width of the hallway there between the blue and the purple as it narrows down?
Yeah.
No,
From here to here, you mean?
no, the darker blue and the purple there.
Oh, from here to here?
I want to say 16 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is very generous. actually.
Right, it just doesn't look
It
like
looks
that
tight, but it's.
because I'm just envisioning, because there's only one way to the cafeteria. And I'm envisioning 300 kids migrating down that hallway for a lunch shift.
Yeah.
And then 300 kids migrating out from the cafeteria. So I'm just,
Yeah.
is that wise, I guess, that close to the cafeteria when you have that many kids coming and going? Because I don't see any other way to get to the classrooms other than that hallway.
Yeah, so you'll have this on both floors, and so if you see these kind of lines here, this is what we would consider the main path of travel moving through, and it maintains that width all the way down through. Where we pulled this main communicating stair between the first and second floor, it's off of that piece of travel, so you don't have a pinch point condition, so we have the ability to kind of merge into that lane there. It's it's quite wide.
Okay.
There's plenty of schools that have.
I would say
much smaller.
No, that's,
It's-
I just wanted to make sure it was wide enough to be able to accommodate.
I mean, you would see that as the widest point, just to give you, just to give you Douglas, for example, that's the widest point, and it narrows on the second floor to, not quite half of that, but these corridors, we're thinking, in fact, one of the kind of concepts here was this as a learning street, right? But this is very wide. If you look at it in the context of the classroom, how wide this is.
Sure.
And so the main anchor points being
Yeah.
kind of the media center and you know, the kitchen, cafeteria and gym on that side. And so that does contextually look small, but it's only because it's so large in the center.
Sure.
One of the things that came up over and over from the staff here was to not have the congestion that we currently have at the main staircase.
Oh, yeah.
And so when they looked at the multiple stairways off of a central thought or central area, that was part of the thought, was to make sure we didn't have any of those areas like we have now.
And again, you know, the thing that I don't know, and this would be difficult to do here. We've done directional hallways this year because of COVID. I'm not so sure that schools won't continue to do directional hallways because it lessens the traffic and it lessens kids' interaction going back and forth between each other, which is probably cuts down on your discipline and your behavior issues. I don't know if the high school wants to continue to do that. I know some schools have said, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep going. Just there's one direction and that's the way it's going to be.
Well, and that would lend itself well, second floor.
It's certainly.
Potentially, but every kid would have to either, if they're going toward classrooms, they would either have to go upstairs to go back to downstairs to get to their classrooms. Because that's wide enough for kids to be going both directions, is my guess. If we're only doing one direction to get to the cafeteria and one direction out, the opposite.
How are we doing that now?
They have it directionally now. So
Right,
when
but
the kids come out of the
there's still
cafeteria,
only one cafeteria.
yeah, but kids are coming from one direction to get to the cafeteria, and they go out the opposite.
But so if they come out of the cafeteria and they have a class down there.
They have to go left and go around
so
the, right.
The same thing.
I'd just like to throw this out here. I think one of the most important voices here about that should be the student's voice of how it's impacted them in terms of critical conversations that have limited this, though we have a very generous time, more so than in a normal school year, classroom change and stuff. I think that, you know, and obviously we're not making a decision about the current year with the high school, but I do think student voices should contribute to that because this is a big part of their experience, is that opportunity for some years.
That's a really great point. Having Ryan, that was on the student leadership team, he's fantastic, and his ability to kind of walk through, you know, student body concerns. And then we had a group of students that were on the programming meetings that walked through and looked at the floor plans and come in and ask questions on multiple different. Basically, we kind of did it during high time primarily, but they came in large groups. So that provided some really fantastic feedback for us. Absolutely, I would certainly love that. We talked, one of the big things we talked about was just kind of school culture and branding and things like that. How that's another conversation about how this lends itself to those things. So,
I wonder how much it would change now a year later.
yeah, it would be interesting. Yeah.
Very
You want to go over the second floor, kind of briefly?
Right, so the big difference on the second floor, again, you know, we're seeing things that are lower, more than 1 story height, so the cafeteria, the gym, you know, the space that we need for future auditorium, the media center, the common space here is a 2-story space. So we think that this actually, you know, kind of moving through this corridor here would be really, really cool, being able to kind of see down into the media center on one side and then also into that kind of more main common space on the opposite side. And then all of these kind of collared spaces really lend itself to bringing a lot of daylight into the central core of the building, so it doesn't feel boxed in, closed off. We have a lot of opportunity to do that and make it feel like more of an open facility. And so when we start to look at this in terms of interior renderings, I think it'll be really, really, really cool. The main section, we have, obviously, we've got math and English that form the bulk of the standard classroom components on each of these wings. We also have science upstairs. So the important about science being on the second floor is that obviously for the main lab spaces, we have to have vent hoods which go to the roof. And so it makes more sense from a building efficiency standpoint to place this on the second floor. Placing the major lab components as well as the science classroom, which are like kind of a slightly toned down version of a lab. It's much more than just a classroom space. Having those and having direct access to those lab spaces across the corridor from one another, I think works out really well. Then obviously you just get the second floor, the gymnasium space will be down. And, that's
No, there's a discussion of next steps in the design process after leadership committee has determined the budget, but I think Crazy Creek probably needs to give theirs tonight, and we may have been overly ambitious with our agenda, and obviously, it's better to have more meetings and make sure we cover everything thoroughly.
I agree. So, I'll go to the Tracy slide and let them come up here.
Starts with a brief overview of how construction manager handles things. Project and how the beneficial capital.
Before I start with that, though, I'd like to introduce myself.
Well,
I'm David West, I'm the president of Trace Creek.
I'm Clay Wright, work vice president and senior project manager.
Rick Bentley, estimator.
All right, your question was, as a construction manager, how we add like long-term value to a
Yeah,
project?
I think probably not everyone understands how this a project of this size, the advantage of bringing in a construction manager when we did to try and help save big expenses over the life of the project.
Well, I mean, as far as construction manager, the main thing we have is we're working with the architect from the very beginning. We're helping maintain budgets, but we're also looking at constructability out. And we're constantly doing that, making suggestions. If we did this, it would save money. Things that you would never see is like, bricks and stone, with just the constructability as far as how the materials go together in the sales. That's the thing that adds more value to a project, from a construction management standpoint. Does that answer your question? Rich is going to give you a little snapshot of, where we were at in February, which was our last budget, last part of February. And, we'll be talking a little later about some of the value engineering items that, that's been, put on the table for right now for discussion, but where our budget was at that point versus where we're at on the BG3, an overall project, scope. And then he's also going to talk to you a little bit about the bidding process itself, what you'll see, on bid day. And, given the COVID that we're having to deal with now, it's changed all that. But in person, this is the first time we've met in months together, which I love. I'm ready to go back to meetings myself to accomplish more. But there's ways to still have, pre-bid meetings and bid openings, given COVID, through land imaging and some services like that, which Rich can touch on in a minute. But
First of all, I'll talk to you a little bit about where we're at. Well, good evening, everybody. I got one of the funnest jobs here, and money man, so usually get scrutinized. I have all those kind of comments come out about that. My wife's a teacher, back, where we live. I grew up in Green County, and got a little cousin that, just started as a freshman here this year, so I got a little personal interest in the school going to. Understand the concerns that's been raised here tonight. I respect those. We see that with a lot of school districts. Getting into the numbers, we performed our last test at the beginning of February. This was based on the building footprint and plans that our architect walked you all through tonight. The last budget we was at roughly 40.1 million. Comparatively to your DG3 cost that was previously approved, I believe you all was at 38.8 million. So we are about 1.4 off target currently. A couple of things that drove that price up from the first time around. I hate to even mention it, but it's the elephant in the room, coronavirus. I don't know if any of you all have gone to a lumber store recently, but prices are ridiculous. In fact, since that last budget we ran, we have seen a consistent rise in construction materials. I don't have a super accurate pinpoint on that on this figure, but we probably witnessed a 3 to 4% increase since we ran this last budget. Now, I say this as we're your advisor. I don't want to scare you all or cast doom and gloom, but that is definitely what we have seen. As far as we can tell, this is just a standard example. I hate to be cliche of supply and demand. When this hit, manufacturing plants slowed down their production, supplies went down, owners, people looking to build were scared to death and holding on to their funds. So demand went down, and as soon as those interest rates went way low, everybody just started, going to apply for loan, want to start building. And that is the bloom that we're seeing right now. So it is really hard to predict this, but from what we hear from different suppliers and manufacturers, they expect this to plateau sometime this summer and hopefully start to normalize after that. So
Will that be the new normal?
yes.
Because, I mean, that's the fear, is that you see increases, and when they level, that's where they stay. They don't necessarily come back to where they were
They
before.
could come down slightly, but typically, when you have, if it drastically escalates, yes, it usually comes down more. But this is something that typically, construction costs are going to continue to go up. Since the first school I was a project manager was in '98. Since then, projects that went up, they have doubled by square foot, over $100 a square foot more now than they were then. Every year you're going to have increases, 3 to 5%. So you're never going to have next year. It's not going to be less than it is this year or the following year. It's always going to continue to rise.
But this sort of hyperinflation that we're talking about, we're talking about lumber in particular here, right?
Steel since last fall is half again the cost of it. It's 40 to 50% higher than it was last fall. Labor costs haven't really changed at all. There is a labor shortage due to some of the things that's going on in our world, to prevent people from wanting to go to work. But the increases are coming from materials. We have not even seen really a slowdown. We have had all kinds of work since it's going up. It hasn't slowed us down at all. We haven't even seen any material
supply shortages until the last few months. Like all that fall, I kept expecting it to happen, where you couldn't get materials. It hasn't happened until the first part of this year. And now there's just little things that are preventing, bigger pieces of equipment from being able to be, delivered. Making a whole chip or something that gives you something, a large piece of equipment that keeps you from getting that piece of equipment. That's the kind of thing that's making these costs rise up right now. But I do look for some of that to come back down, but as far as saying it, the cost is going to be back down to where it was last year or the year before, I can't say that it will.
And so the bids that we saw on the big schools that came in way under the projected amounts. I think there were a couple in Fayette County that really surprised everybody. That moment has passed.
I would say,
I was thinking about,
and it's always just an outsider looking in. You don't know what happens in those, people did a project that day. But when you go into a year when COVID happened, we didn't even know about it very long at that time. People are feared that there's not going to be work next year. They're going to be bidding much more aggressive than they would have if they knew there was going to be all kinds of work coming in. That makes sense.
that does.
Supply and demand.
It is.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
All right, Rich, I didn't mean to hold you up.
Oh, no, you're fine. But now this is slightly less than that first budget that we had ran a while back, and some of the reasoning behind the price coming down was we did figure a few things to kind of refine the design from that point in time. We also had included an estimated amount of DPO tax savings, direct purchase orders with the school into the amount. And that's how we was able to drop down the cost a little bit. It did inflate some from when we were in the previous budget back last summer. And one additional thing that drove up the cost a little bit was coming into light of the greenhouse requirement from KDE to the school that was not figured into the initial budget. When you say that term, the DPO? DPO, it's a direct purchase order. Schools can make use of that. It's essentially using your tax. Yes, the purchase materials. It's anything $5,000 or more. So it's, you don't want to be doing direct purchase orders because Kentucky's not like Ohio and some surrounding states where they give you a tax exempt number and people just order, whatever. It's not as controlled as Kentucky. Kentucky, you have to, at bid time, within 48 hours, provide a list to us, the construction managers, of what those materials are, what the values are, and who it's coming from. That has to go to KDE. It can only be $5,000 or more items. So. And those elements that qualify in the building process are which part? It can be anything that becomes in place in the wall. Like if you have an electrician that orders conduit, and they pick up some hand tools while they're there, that has to get marked off the invoice. It's not part of the building once it's complete. So, and then we pay a lot of attention to that. We review every invoice, we mark it all, we have to approve it, sign it before it comes to you. It's all laid out to you. The materials and not labor. It's all material. Yeah, and you would be paying those invoices. All you'd be doing is paying an amount that we've already verified that's based off of a direct purchase order that, that you already have an amount for. It cannot exceed that. Once they, close out that DPO, if they didn't have enough material figured in the DPO, at that point, they have to pay tax on it themselves. If there's a balance left at the end, which I think is crazy, but this is a requirement in Kentucky on KDE projects, that balance becomes owners. The contractor doesn't get the balance back if they don't use all the material. But that's how it is. That's the rule. getting back to this budget, like I mentioned, just based off of what our target goal was and where are we at, this is the time where we need to get creative and really start to dive into value engineering options. And value engineering doesn't always have to be going for something cheaper. Sometimes it makes sense to approach things in certain ways where you retain that quality, but you have savings that come along with it. And what's really going to be important for us and the design team to really get this project to come into realization is working with you all to see what we are going to do to deliver the product you all want. We basically have constraints on our side, and those constraints are truths. That is the money that is available and the constraints that KDE holds us to. And I'll commend you all on this. This is the most proactive board working with community that I've ever been a part of. But very importantly for us, this number can move wherever we need it to go, as long as we need, the input from you all of what we're actually approaching. And when we define that, that's going to allow us to offer you more concise ideas of how we're going to get there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some things that we can address without diving into kind of what Scott alluded to with not coming out with the product that we want. I'm not positive that $90,000 for a bell tower is a better use than putting that $90,000 into something else. I think that's a tough sell to constituents. When you roll a project like this out, people want to see that this process has happened, that we have sat down and looked at things and said it's a good use of taxpayer money. And I think that is something that I'm very hopeful this committee will address. It's, have we been good stewards of that? Where can we be better stewards of that? And still come out with a quality product that's the best thing for our students. And that's just one example. I mean, I'm certain that there are others that we can find. And I didn't actually even remember that on the original plan, but I'm positive the bell tower in front. I remember we talked about that because that was one of the things that Mr. Hawkins addressed was coming up, that the entrance looked a little bit plain. Do you remember that, Scott? And they built in. No, the first rendering had a different front.
I remember liking the other design better. That's what I remember. I don't remember the belt.
But on this one, I remember they fixed it because you thought it looked a little bit plain in coming up, and maybe the bell tower got added then.
Yeah, there was early on, we had kind of a bylaw fantasy system at the front doors to the building, and one of the concerns was that it didn't jump out to you as you're kind of approaching that the main entrance. So one of the things that we talked about was adding some sort of a visual cue that you could see all the way as you circulate through the site, you know exactly where you're headed through the whole time. And so that was one of the ways that we did that with the bell tower.
And I remember too, that we talked about the fact that nobody knows which is the entrance at the middle school.
Yeah.
No one knows which one that they're supposed to come in, and we wanted to make sure we didn't recreate that here. And that may have been something.
You always want to know where the main entrance of the building is, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the safety, concern as well, making sure that you're filtering everybody that's coming to the building that front.
I'm gonna be completely honest, the word bell tower and safety don't come together as a social studies teacher. I'm just gonna throw that out there. But, that might be something. I know we have a time frame. My husband's a construction manager. I get, but understand that you have a time frame to do. But that could be an opportunity. If you need a point place, make it clear and identifiable that this is the entrance to it. why not offer that up for a student to design something within a certain type of budget to have a conversation with our high school? You know what I mean? Like that it's reflective of that pride, that identity, and that transition of old to new. Again, I don't know if it's feasible at this point in time of where we're at with it. But to me, that's the perfect place to say, make a bridge between the old and the new and bring student voice into it.
Well, and to that point, we have already said,
Yeah, like I
taking the,
would do the glass work and stuff like that. There could be a way to do it if we have the time frame available. Okay. I put a little change for a lot.
Right, yeah. I will say this, being an estimator, I personally went through every sheet that the architect has drawn. I've seen every nook and cranny of this building. This is a fantastic building. I would be thrilled to have something like this in our home district of Greenup County. I realize that you're never going to be able to make an entire community, faculty entirely happy. There is always going to be someone upset somewhere, but trying to get as close to that as we can is key. And we are happy to help guide you guys there wherever we need to go with that. But everything we have seen with this school, and this is my opinion, this is not just a school you build because you can.
thank you. Jay, is there anything else you want to add?
Not really, not unless you have questions on that. I know the next time we'll discuss the process. I don't know if that exactly, if that falls into the same category what we've already talked about, or if you just want us to give more detail on that entire process, or.
I'm thinking that we may be kind of at a natural stopping point for tonight and try and move some of the remaining agenda to the next meeting and go over things, give us a chance, everybody to look at it, to kind of follow up on any questions. If anybody has any questions, Mr. Green, if you've got anything that kind of jumps out at you that you want to. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. And I know, Mr. Johnson, you'd like to look at maybe current versus the potential and look at some ideas, and we can.
Is there a way, and I'm not asking you to, but like if we were to look at that with the gym piece, how much additional square footage would be needed in order to make that happen?
We can do some quick sketches and see.
Right, just to kind of get a sense, and while you're at it, and this is just me, is I shared this with you the other day. I'm not a big fan of walking into the cafeteria to go to the gym for an event, or to walk into the cafeteria and go to the auditorium for an event. If with that square footage, is there a way to create a lobby area where you could potentially have that where people aren't even in the rest of the building if they're coming to an event? Because I just think about our custodians, that how many times they're gonna have to clean that cafeteria on a night when we have a ball game. And, they already are stretched really, really thin. So I just, that lobby area to me is a great way to bring people into the building, but not into the rest of the building.
So cafeterias are often used as kind of the staging area for students coming in, and it's a great way to give them multiple functions so that they're not just used by one group at one time. So I think one of the things you can do in order to not have it be the whole cafeteria is we think about how the furniture is laid out, and maybe that stuff kind of can be moved and it becomes, there is a kind of, a part of that cafeteria is kind of the set lobby area without having to add a lot of double square footage
Yeah.
for a space that isn't used a lot.
Right.
You know, so you really want that cafeteria to be multifunctional in order to maximize kind of the space that you're using within that building. But maybe you can define spaces in that cafeteria so that they're not using the whole thing or something at, you know, off hours and stuff in order to reduce some of that double cleaning. Because even, you know, people come into lobbies, you're gonna have to clean that too, so.
Sure.
It's about, you know.
But that's kind of part of the gym.
Yeah.
You know, where it's kind of part of this area over here, so you kind of know.
Control with how people use
Right.
that cafeteria in off hours rather than just kind of the whole thing. I think that might be a good exploration. So, Danny, I know you're trying to wrap this up, and I just want to make one last statement. Of course. There's a lot of numbers in here that you all already have in a package, which if I could take those sheets off and not give them to you yet, since we haven't had a chance to explain them and go through them. It's hard, like, you're gonna look at this and you're gonna be like, what is this? And I know you're already looking at those numbers, so I just want to say that, we did the BG3, kind of that was passed in August, is on here, and it shows construction and soft costs kind of highlighted to get to a total. And then just for discussion purposes, we put some other numbers in there that were the cost estimate as we were in February and what the soft cost would be in total. And then we also looked at if we added all of those alternates that are still on the table, like no decisions about what the alternates are have been made, but you know, there's some that are out there that are discussion points that we were hoping to get to today. So, when we continue this discussion, I'll make sure I really explain all those numbers. If they, and, you know, I know you're looking at them, you're wondering what they mean, and in the meantime, just questions, you know, we're here, Trace Creek is here, try to answer those, and then we'll continue this discussion when we meet again.
Absolutely, and I do want to make the point that we are close. If you even look at with all of the alternates, 54,776. If we were to find some state funds, if we were to find some partnerships, we're really knocking on the door of having something great for our kids and our community. And I'm grateful for everyone's time tonight. Mr. Hawkins, I'm grateful for your input. I think we will be better, the end product will be better for having the discussions now rather than wishing we had done it differently.
Ms. Lavin, as a member of the faculty here, is there any way, because my eyesight is gone, just like that, is there any way to get those screenshots again, the way that you had them up here, so that, let's be real, as teachers, we've been teaching through a pandemic, right? This has kind of been pushed in our mind as we've been going day to day to survive and thrive in a difficult time. But this would allow Mr. Johnson and I to go back to our colleagues and say, okay, it's time to revisit this and to look through it a little bit more, like I said, I vision.
Sure. I do think it would be fair to do that after they've had a chance to explain everything.
Right.
So that you're able to best pass that along and that we're all on the same page on that. But absolutely, I'm sure we can send a PDF.
Right, so that we can print those off and be able to.
Yeah, you know, these are PDFs, and then when you know, they're small on the screen, but then when you try to print them,
Oh, I
they get
totally
even smaller.
Yeah.
So-
All right, would anybody,
Mr. Warren probably not would start off on
I'm sorry.
Mr. Warren probably not would start off on you were in funding. Just make sure you do remember to.
Thank you, that'd be great. And Mr. Howell, anything else that,
No, I guess the one question, does that mean we're, based on the last comment, are we assuming then we're on the 50.1 billion budget as opposed to 42.6?
well, I'm not speaking on what the board would do. We can only make those decisions when all five of us are together to vote on those kind of things. I was just looking at the comparison of the two numbers, not committing to anything I'm sorry if I gave that impression. I don't think that anyone would be wanting to go to the wall. I know districts do that and don't leave any bonding capacity. Mr. Hawkins has kind of shared some of the scarier parts of doing that. So that is not, I'm not committing, just was comparing the two right now. Mr. Kale, anything else from you or the mayor?
I don't think so. Thank you all very much.
It's gonna be like you guys are the cattlers on the Muppets. It's the mayor, something there. Yeah. All right, then, we haven't really had motions tonight, but is there a motion to adjourn? So moved, is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. All right, thank you all very much for your time. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, right.